a scandal involving 8 members of Hockey Canada's 2018 World Junior team. Allegations of sexual assault. They have settled out of court. But the National Hockey League must do something. What can they do? What will they do? What should they do? I discuss it on the Sick Podcast with Marinero. Sports lawyer David Kellerman is coming up.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast with Tony Marinero. The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast.
And now a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
Sports entertainment like no other. Brought to you by 8.6 Beer, intense by nature, and La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you.
And welcome, Marinero, the Sick Podcast, presented by 8.6 Beer, intense by nature, the beer for those who follow their instinct and live their passions in order to make their mark. And, of course, brought to you by La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you go back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you. Nothing surprises me anymore in the world of sport and in this game of life. But the news that came out just over a week ago, first reported by Rick Westhead of TSN, is truly and absolutely disturbing. Court records show that a plaintiff filed a report of allegations of sexual assault by 8 members of the 2018 Hockey Canada World Junior team. And since then, there seems to be a settlement out of court. But why did it take 4 years for this story to come up? And what will the National Hockey League do, even though no one has yet been proven guilty? This is above my pay grade. I bring in sports lawyer David Kellerman. Hello, David. Good afternoon.
Hi, Tony. How are you?
I'm doing good, David. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. I'm happy to be on.
Thank you very much. Open invitation for you anytime. First of what I believe and I hope will be several times that you'll be on the Sick Podcast. Dave, this has been going on now, first reported over a week ago. The plaintiff says that in 2018, she was repeatedly assaulted while intoxicated in a hotel room following an event that honored Team Canada's 2018 World Junior team, who had won the gold medal. The woman is 24 years old now. So back in 2018, 4 years ago, she was probably 20. And she was seeking $3.55 million in damages. There was a settlement. Not so sure we have the details to the settlement just yet, but Dave, why does it take 4 years for news to come out?
Well, it takes 4 years because the recourse that this alleged victim filed is recent. So once, the onus is obviously on a victim to file a complaint in different respects. You can file a civil complaint to ask for monetary damages, and you can file a criminal complaint to seek, where the Crown prosecutor will then seek criminal remedies and sanctions against the accused. Here, the proceeding was filed in April, and there was a settlement that was reached rapidly. We don't know what happened in the last 4 years. That's not disclosed. We don't have any information as to what the settlement is. That will probably never come. That will never come out. Part of a settlement is the confidential nature of a settlement. And so the parties, and that'll be a clause in the settlement agreement saying that no parties are to discuss the terms of the settlement unless they're required to do so in other court proceedings. So it does take time.
Okay, the woman did not want to identify the alleged players involved. Let's take a look at that 2018 World Junior roster. Here it is. There are a lot of familiar names that played on that team. Among them, Maxime Comtois, Drake Batherson, Sam Steele, Alex Formanton, Jordan Kyrou, Robert Thomas, Cale Makar, Cal Foote, Dante Fabro, Cale Clegg, who played the past season with the Montreal Canadiens, former Hab Victor Mete. The coach at the time was former Montreal Canadiens coach Dominic Ducharme. His assistant is current assistant coach Trevor Letowski. So there's a lot of familiar names for us today of people who were on that team. Now, in regards to the allegation of sexual assault, why would the plaintiff choose not to name who was involved?
So the plaintiff is allowed to not choose in order to minimize any risk of, because once the cat's out of the bag, if it's publicly acknowledged, then there's a risk of retaliation. It also heightens it's already very public in nature. If you start targeting specific individuals, you enhance the public profile of a situation like this, draws more attention on the victim, which is maybe something that she's not comfortable with. She has been instructed, probably by a team of consultants who have chosen this route, which is a more discreet route, and you can respect that. Obviously, the problem is that look at what we've just done. You just went down a list, and then that casts a shadow over every single one of those guys. Some of them may have nothing to do with it, and now it becomes a guessing game. Who did it? Who didn't? And all of a sudden, now they're all guilty by association in the public eye, or there's skepticism, and that you could argue is damaging in and of itself. So, but she has a choice to name, and there's also the fact that when you go through these types of very, very sensitive allegations that have to do with a person's physical and emotional integrity, there's a right to not have to disclose all this information unduly and at a period in time where it's not necessary. At one point or the other, it would have come out in court had this progressed, but to do it at this stage would not, in the victims, from the victim's point of view, would not have brought any added value to the process.
Would it, by not naming the names, would it provide for a bigger financial settlement or not? Does that have anything to do with it whatsoever?
Well, no. I mean, what it does is by naming the names, the allegations themselves are so damaging that you would have to think that the NHL, the players that are playing in the NHL today, you'd have to think that the NHL would have to do something quickly to stop the hemorrhage, or to show a willingness to act and not, pretend that these are just allegations and they're unproven. In other sports leagues, if there's just mere allegations of domestic violence or assault, you're suspended. And so, the NHL doesn't adopt it to that extent. The NHL is also not, it's not always been in this kind of spotlight. We're seeing it more with what happened with the Kyle Beach incident, and now more and more there's an empowerment of victims to come out and say, look, we have a problem. There could be a systemic problem in hockey, in minor hockey, in professional hockey. It's hard to tell at this point because this is just, this is evolving. And so by choosing not to disclose, and by not disclosing, the NHL now is in a more difficult situation where it's on them to decide whether or not they're going to investigate further and really find out exactly what happened, what went wrong, and what sanctions need to be applied.
I should point out, by the way, that it's not necessarily all 8 members of that World Junior team, because it states that there were players for members of the CHL and Hockey Canada, including but not limited to members of that Canada's U20 men's junior hockey team.
Yeah, and this speaks to something that we discussed when Logan Mailloux was drafted by the Montreal Canadiens.
Okay.
Which is, these kids are brought up in an environment, in a team. They're far from home, especially these competitions. I mean, they're all together. They're not at home. They're not with their parents. They're young. And there have to be, there's a responsibility when Hockey Canada takes on these players that are young, minors in World Juniors, and they have a duty to supervise them. They have a duty to safeguard, to make sure that they themselves are not targets or the target or the victims themselves of sex crimes or any kind of other crimes, and that they are not put in precarious situations that could lead them to commit offenses. And it is very difficult, to safeguard at every respect when these kids, they decide to go out, they start drinking, and to lay certain guidelines in place to make sure that the players are not put in vulnerable situations. But that being difficult doesn't make it impossible. And now more and more we have to ask ourselves, when a Logan Mailloux is sent overseas playing with kids that are his age and then also playing with people that are 30, he's a kid playing in an adult, riding the bus with adults, totally different mindset, not necessarily ready for that. This is by no means excusing what he did, but there have to be mechanisms in place by these governing bodies and these sports associations and these clubs to make sure that the players are protected. And if the players are protected, then in turn, the public is protected as well. Had there been enough safeguarding in place, on that night, maybe the players are not able to do allegedly what happened, and yeah. It's a whole systemic issue that needs to be looked at.
Based on what we're hearing and what we're reading, a player videotaped her with her consent and had her say on video that she was sober and she agreed to what was happening and agreed to what would happen.
How many times have we seen that when people are taken hostage? Again, these are allegations. They're not proven. We have to be very careful when we discuss these things because they are allegations and there is a presumption of innocence. If it's taken from a criminal standpoint, these are unproven facts.
Let me ask you this. Pardon me if I can.
Sure.
Many will say that when there's a settlement, even out of court, it means that something happened that shouldn't have happened.
It means that both parties had the perception that drawing this matter to a close amicably, the benefits of that outweighed any benefits that a judgment could have brought. And so it doesn't mean anything other than that. It may have happened, it may not have happened, but the process that both parties would have embarked on would not have justified, the desired outcome. That they, in their view, that the sacrifice that you make when you go into litigation. I mean, there's what we tell clients is that you have your hard costs is how much you're going to pay lawyers to try and acquire and get justice in court and to make your claims, and then there's a soft cost of how much time you're going to dedicate to think about this file, how much time are you going to spend agonizing over your court appearances, preparing as a witness, reliving the situation, which can create another level of victimization, the trauma that's involved when you're an alleged victim of sexual assault. These are all things that are taken into consideration. You ask yourself, the victim will ask herself, do I want to go through this? Is my search for remedy, is it what brings me closure and peace? And that will change from one victim to the other. And on the other side, Hockey Canada says, well, do we really want to go through this whole process? It's going to be a media, fodder for the media. It's going to be negative spotlight on us for a long period of time. Whether it happened or not, they choose to deal with it. That's all it means.
It's the Sick Podcast. I'm Marinaro. Tell your friends about it. You can follow us on all social media platforms, including subscribing to our YouTube channel. It's absolutely free. You can shop for all your sports lifestyle apparel, including hoodies, caps, T-shirts of your favorite teams, all from your major leagues with sportbovshop.com, and also our Sick merchandise, because this story is really making me sick. You can use code SICK15 for 15% off on all of their items. And matrixhomefitness.ca, you can discover a club quality workout in the comfort of your own home. Visit matrixhomefitness.ca for all of their fitness equipment. All right. A couple of statements have been issued by both Hockey Canada and the National Hockey League. We're going to put them up here on the screen, both back to back, starting with the Hockey Canada one. As soon as Hockey Canada became aware of this matter in 2018, we contacted local police authorities to inform them. The same day, we also retained Hennon Hutchinson, LP, to undertake a thorough independent internal investigation and make recommendations on areas for improvement, which we have been implementing and will continue to pursue. That's their statement. Before we get to the National Hockey League statement, Dave, what does that mean exactly? Put it back up on the screen, please. What does that mean as soon as Hockey Canada became aware of this matter in 2018? So in 2018,
that's what they're saying. They knew.
They knew
in 2018. And then the questions arise. So what did you do in 2018?
Doesn't break this story. This is all under the rug.
It probably never comes out. No, what's the benefit of it coming out? Who wins? With it coming out. Not only that, but if it comes out, you're also doing it. You're potentially exposing a victim as well in the way that, in it coming out as well. Like, the victim will control the narrative here to a certain point. Then when the allegations come out, when the victim decides to finally file the lawsuit, then the damage control happens on the defense side, and they have to start, especially when it's in the public eye, they need to put out press releases in order to appease. This is all about appeasing the public. This is a Canadian, it's our national sport. It's Hockey Canada. It's not the church, but it means a lot to the country. It's our kids. It's the people that we cheer for 2 weeks out of the year. It brings the whole country together during the holidays. It's a very, very high profile event. And at the same time, it's also such an important launching pad for so many great players that we've seen in the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And so it's a very sensitive spot, that Hockey Canada is in. And they need to make sure that the public, that they show that there's sensitivity, awareness, and there's a certain level of accountability as well, without admitting anything. They can't admit to the wrongdoing. If they've settled, it's obviously part and parcel of the settlement, is that in that settlement, they will not have admitted to having done anything wrong, that they're buying the peace. And so, but it does mean that they said that they took it seriously and that they retained an internal investigator, and they were then counseled according to that investigation report.
All right. A couple of days later, the National Hockey League issued a statement as well. It reads, the National Hockey League was advised of a lawsuit involving sexual allegations filed against 8 unnamed members of the 2018 Canadian World Junior Hockey Team. We were subsequently provided with the statement of claim containing allegations of behavior that is both abhorrent and reprehensible. Okay, so now, on that note, my question to you is, what can the National Hockey League do?
So the wording is interesting, right? It's important. They're saying abhorrent and reprehensible.
Yeah.
They're using strong wording. They're saying they're allegations that are abhorrent and reprehensible. In choosing that wording, they're trying to show a level of awareness and sensitivity to the problem. They're showing that, we're going to take this seriously. It's unacceptable.
Of course.
Now it's a matter of what can the NHL do, given today's landscape, given what happened in the Cobb Beach story, which now is a canvas for how the NHL needs to be a model for how the NHL wishes to act going forward, not going back, because we know that going back, there were corrections that needed to be made. When Kyle Beach came out with his allegations at the time. So what they can do, and again, you're governed by the CBA. The players are governed by their contracts as well. I mean, they're employees of their teams, and the teams are members of the NHL. And so you have different layers of contracts there. You have a lot of financial interests that are in play, and you have the need to have the NHL espouse the proper values that sport has to be an ambassador for. So the NHL is in a very difficult spot, because it is, if the Habs didn't throw the book at Logan Mailloux, but the Habs put him in a pretty serious timeout, and said, look, you're out for a year for a serious offense, but this is on another level, right? So the NHL is almost put in a position where they can't turn a blind eye. They can't not try and take action and investigate further, because there would potentially be 6, 7, 8 perpetrators of a heinous crime that are playing amongst their ranks. And that immediately casts a pall over the NHL that would not take those allegations seriously. What they do with them, again, these are unproven, right? So what do you do? Like, do you come up with your own investigative report, and then you deem that what they did was happened according to what burden of proof? What are the mechanisms that are you going to use to file a sanction? That's why in other sports leagues if you throw the league into disrepute via your conduct, if there are allegations that are serious enough that throw our league or our sports team into disrepute, then you can be suspended. And that's very much, something that the NHL could look at going forward.
There's an audit that's been triggered by the government. I mean, what kind of audit are we talking about here?
Well, Hockey Canada is funded in, there's a federal component to Hockey Canada in terms of the funding. So if $1 of taxpayers' money goes towards a settlement that would also amount to a possible cover-up, a settlement is a cover-up to a certain extent, right? It's we don't want to disclose, we want to keep it confidential, we want to make this go away. But the word cover-up will be used by the media to say, look, how could you not want to blow this out in the open and say that we've targeted these perpetrators, we've acknowledged that it happened, and we're going to do something concrete to make sure it never happens again. So we have none of that publicly, because these are all unproven allegations. But if taxpayers' money was allegedly used to fund this settlement, well, there's a morality problem there in terms of, is this something that we sign off on as taxpayers, and does the federal government endorse the use of public money towards these types of make it go away situations?
David, when there's a settlement, is that situation dead, or can that come back up?
If the parties are expressing informed consent and there's been no undue pressure on either side to reach an agreement, then that settlement, and the party is of age, sound mind, physical sound mind and physical mental capacity to provide informed consent, it's virtually impossible to go back. That's a transaction. It's binding in law. It's the law that is governing the parties. It depends now what the transaction, what the settlement encompasses. I'll tell you one thing. I do a lot of family law, and you'll often see in family cases where there are nasty custody disputes, or if there's domestic violence allegations between the parties, that one party will file for divorce, and then that party at the same time will file a criminal complaint against their husband or wife for domestic violence or whatnot. We are not allowed as civil lawyers to do a deal when we settle the divorce file or the custody file, the family law file. We are not allowed as family lawyers to say, okay, I'm going to trade you custody of the kids, but at the same time, you're going to drop the charges against me. Because in Canada, the criminal procedure is governed by the Crown. It's the Crown prosecutor. Civil lawyers are not allowed to immerse themselves in the Crown prosecution's case and in their evidence and their files. So we can get disbarred for doing that. So typically, you would not be allowed to have a transaction between the parties that are at play here that would forbid the victim, allegedly, from filing criminal complaints. You would think that would be an open door, because it's a fundamental right that we have to fight, to defend ourselves against crimes, and therefore to exercise the articles that are at our disposition under the Canadian Criminal Code. So you can't just say, look, here's money, but you're not going to sue me and you're not going to file a criminal accusation against me, or a criminal complaint against me.
So long story short, what you're telling me is, even though this settlement kind of puts closure to it all, because they would avoid, all the attention, the unwanted attention that it would bring if it continues, that there still can be criminal repercussions if indeed some kind of crime took place.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, there's no, at this point, there's no statute of limitations that will forbid the victim from undertaking criminal proceedings. So that would typically be an avenue that would be open to her if she feels that that's where she wants to take it. And then,
Dave, if I can, let's just say, and pardon me, just so I don't forget my train of thought here. Let's just say she believes that, at least one member definitely committed a crime, and she brings that to light a couple of years from now. Can she end up settling out of court with that particular person as well, and end up
in the criminal proceedings?
Yes.
Well, the criminal proceedings, once you've filed a complaint,
yes,
you go to the police. The way it works, step one, you go to the police, you file a complaint. The police will then, will take your statement, will then usually meet with the accused, and will decide, based on the initial information that they have, whether there's enough sufficient evidence to mount a criminal case. If they believe that an arrest warrant needs to be issued, they do so, and then the file becomes judicial. And then the police hands, or the authorities will hand the file over to the Crown prosecutors, and then you've pretty much lost control of the file to a certain extent, in the sense that if you're no longer willing to cooperate with the Crown as the star witness, as the victim, the Crown has a harder time in making the evidence, right? So long as the victim is motivated to continue, then the Crown will continue. And in certain very serious offenses, even if the victim doesn't want to continue, the Crown is oftentimes obligated to pursue to the full extent. Now, within that platform, this ecosystem of criminal law, you have plea bargains. They don't all go to court. They can decide, the Crown prosecution can decide to drop the case if there's evidence that comes to light that they feel could be very damaging. If the other side presents an argument or presents a deal that would be a plea bargain, so you negotiate a lesser sentence or a lesser fine, to a lesser infraction, so long as the judge endorses it, then it could happen. So these are all mechanisms that could also lead to an amicable, I don't like calling it an amicable resolution in criminal law, but it is a resolution. But the other thing is this: it's not just the victim that can file a complaint. Anyone who is a witness to what happened, if you see a murder being committed on the streets, you can go to the police and the person that committed the murder will be arrested. It's not just the victim, obviously not of a murder, but of an attempted murder, that has the opportunity to go to the police. Anyone who's in that room, if that really happened, that did not participate, and the problem is that if they were all in the room, then did they all abet, aid and abet? Were they part of the problem? Are they also subject to some kind of fine or some kind of sanction? But anyone who knew. So
if someone's there watching and doesn't do anything, that person is an accomplice in this whole thing.
Yeah. You know, I don't like spinning it towards Hollywood movies, but if there's a movie that really drove that whole concept home, it was The Accused with Jodie Foster, which is a masterpiece. It's a beautiful movie. It's a heartbreaking movie. But if you watch, that you are assimilated to being not the master perpetrator of the crime, but you're part of the mechanism that enabled the crime.
Dave, thanks so much for educating me, our listeners, all our viewers today. I appreciate it, but we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Tony. It was a pleasure.
You're very welcome. All right. It's the Sick Podcast, Marinaro. And if there's any truth to this story whatsoever, to this allegation, then it's absolutely sickening.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by 8.6, Intense by Nature, and Lacage. If the last time you went to Lacage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to Lacage. The menu will surprise you.